Howard here with Jazz Guitar Basics, and I'm kind of considering this a companion video, if you will, to my beginning jazz guitar series. So if you haven't checked that out, I'll put a link to it in the description box below, okay? But the main reason for doing this video is simply because several viewers have requested it. Can you give us that basic information, the most important stuff, in another video in a different key and maybe even slow things down even more, okay? So it's always a good idea to know the fretboard inside and out in all kinds of keys. And I presented the material in C major in part 1 of the Jazz Guitar series, and so I'm doing this in G major. So it's kind of a review, if you will. If you've seen that, then this is a nice review, and it's nice to work it out in a different key. And if you haven't seen that, just enjoy this video and go through it, and then for a deeper dive, you can get into that series, okay? So as I say, we are in the key of G major, so we want to take a look at that G major scale, which is G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. Right? A simple G major scale, what's called a diatonic scale. And for each note in the scale, we have a corresponding chord, okay? So that's called a chord scale progression. We're going to have a combination of major chords and minor chords, okay? And the reason for that is really simple. In order for chords to be in the same key and harmonize with each other, they have to utilize notes from that singular scale, from that G major scale. So for instance, the first chord is a G major. And if the second chord was an A major, it would have a C sharp in it, which would throw us into a different key because there's no C sharp in the scale. So that C sharp has to become a C natural, and then all of a sudden, the chord becomes an A minor, okay? So that's a simple, quick explanation. Once you know that, all you've got to do is know the formula, the pattern, okay? And the pattern is this. The first chord, the G, will be G major. The second chord, the A, will be A minor. The third chord will be B minor. The fourth chord will be C major. The fifth chord will be D major. The sixth chord will be E minor. And the seventh chord will be the diminished chord, and we'll talk about that in just a second, okay? So let's dive in. Now, as mentioned in my beginning jazz guitar part 1 of the series, in jazz, we rarely use anything smaller than a seventh. That's not a 100% across the board rule by any means, okay? There's a lot of great chords in jazz once you expand out. But for the basic fundamentals of jazz chord voicings, they add sevenths to the chords. So in other words, instead of just a regular G major or a regular A minor, it becomes G major 7, A minor 7, B minor 7, C major 7, D dominant 7, E minor 7, F sharp minor 7 flat 5, and finally back to the octave G major 7. And that minor 7 flat 5, the F sharp minor 7 flat 5, is also known as a half diminished chord. It's often called that again. So once again, we have G major 7, A minor 7, B minor 7, C major 7, D 7, dominant 7th, E minor 7, F sharp minor 7 flat 5. And you'll notice you can literally hear the scale go by in chords. Very sweet indeed, okay? Now, for each chord in the progression, in this diatonic chord progression, you have arpeggios, right? So backing up just a hair, we're going to have a couple of different fingerings for each of these chords. Major sevenths played like this, major sevenths played like that, minor sevenths like this, and minor sevenths, and minor sevenths like that, okay? So you'll learn a couple of different ways to play these chords as well. For a deeper dive, definitely do check out my beginning jazz guitar course, okay? So let's dive in. The very first chord, as we've stated, is a G major 7. And in my promise to slow everything down just a little bit, this is a G major 7 arpeggio. right, and then we move to the A minor 7 chord, and the arpeggio is this. Once again, real slowly. Now moving to the B minor 7th chord, you can see the chord shape is exactly the same, but it's at the 7th fret. So the arpeggio is exactly the same. But as I said, we'll have a couple of different fingerings, not just for the chords, but for the arpeggios as well, okay? So, but the B minor 7th at the 7th fret would be this. Exact same fingering, right? So that's pretty sweet, okay? So then we move to the C major 7 chord, okay? And we're playing this major 7th like this off of the 5th string, which you can see on the screen. And so we're going to offer up another fingering for the arpeggio as well, okay? So that's a very linear fingering, and that's a great one to learn. So again, another shape for the major 7th chord, and another shape for the arpeggio. And then of course we move to the D dominant 7th. As a note, the 5th chord in a diatonic chord progression, in other words, the 5th chord in a major scale, is always the dominant 7th, okay? And that's for the exact same reason that I mentioned earlier. If you used a major 7th, you'd have that C sharp note again, like I mentioned earlier, and we want it to be a C natural. So that becomes a dominant 7th. Okay, so the dominant 7th arpeggio, the D dominant 7th, is played like so. Very dominant sounding, if you will. And then we move to the E minor 7 chord. So here's a second way to play a minor 7th. Okay. And the arpeggio is played like so. So this is a second way to play a minor 7th arpeggio as well. Then we move to the F sharp minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished chord. And I love this arpeggio. Here it is nice and slow. Great sounding arpeggio. And then finally we get to the G major 7 chord a full octave higher, okay? And we can use that same shape for the major 7 arpeggio that we used on the C down here. Now this material is what I consider the most basic, fundamental parts, if you will, of jazz guitar. Knowing the basic diatonic chord progression, major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, or half diminished in this case. Knowing that formula is very, very important. And then knowing the arpeggios that go with the chords, okay? That's just basic standard jazz stuff that you want to learn if you're just getting into jazz. But of course things can go much deeper, you know, which I talk about in my jazz series once again. You can tie the modes to this. I'm not doing that in this particular lesson, but if you guys want me to review that as well, I'll put together another basic jazz guitar video and tie in the chords, the scales being the modes, and arpeggios, okay? But for now, I'd like to offer you up a little practice thing that you can play, a little rhythmic thing, if you will, using shell chords, which I talk about in the jazz series again. But just to give you a little rhythmic practice of just roving through these chords up and down, okay? So here we go. that's a fun thing to practice, kind of gets the chords memorized and into your mind's eye, so to speak, and gives you a little basic jazz rhythm practice, okay? So we're starting with the G major 7th. We're just going up the scale chords and down the scale chords, okay? So anyway, we've got a G major 7th, and I'm playing it just like that, except you don't really need your second finger. I'm actually just playing it like that. 3 on the 6th string, and then 4 and 4 on the D and the G strings, okay? But we have a definite rhythm here. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm using alternate strokes, playing the bass note with a downstroke of the pick, and then playing the G and the D strings with an upstroke. And the rhythm, once again, is this. Maybe with a little slight subtle muting, okay? And that's the rhythm that we're going to use, ascending the scale, okay? But we're going to break it up between the chords. So that A minor 7th now is being played like so. Everything's in the 5th fret. 5th fret on the 6th string, 5th fret on the D and the G. So we have start the rhythm over again at B minor 7th, and you can see I'm just sliding that up a whole step. And then we're going to go to the C major 7th, and again I'm just playing it like this. You can see it inside the chord, so you can form the whole chord if you want to, or you can play it like I'm doing it. 3rd fret on the 5th string, 4th fret on the G string, 5th fret on the E string. And so we're playing across the A string now, and the B and the G. So now we have to the D dominant 7th, and I kind of prefer a D9 right there. I think it's a little bit sweeter sounding, although we'll use the dominant 7th coming backwards. So once again, a D9, 5th fret on the A string, 4th fret on the D string, and then 5th fret on the G and the B string. And if you want, you can bring more strings into this one. You know, kind of swinging up and hitting the B, the G, and the D as well. And then we move to the E minor 7th, of course, and I'm playing this one as a shell chord as well. And so I'm playing the 7th fret on the A string, 7th fret on the G string, and 8th fret on the B string. Right? So we have And for descending, I added another rhythm that I think is good for practice as well. And again, it just helps you get these chord scales in your mind's eye. Okay, so we start with the G major 7th up high, and what I'm doing here is I'm playing, okay, so 2 downstrokes, A to the D string, and then an upstroke on the B and the G. And then the same thing at the F sharp minor 7 flat 5. E minor 7, D dominant 7th, played as a dominant 7th, C major 7, B minor 7th, A minor 7, and finally G major 7. So let me play that nice and slow for you. Putting it all together, it should sound like this. So there you go with jazz guitar basics, just understanding the basic diatonic scale and how the chords work within it, and also the arpeggios that accompany the chords, okay? So again, I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to take a deeper dive, you can check out my beginning jazz guitar series, okay? All the best to everyone, and I'll see you guys soon.